Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Küstenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures, your future. Now, what if I told you that one of the most significant demographic shifts shaping our cities, our housing markets, and even our social lives over the next few decades isn't migration? You know what everyone's talking about. It isn't birth rates and it isn't aging. Actually, it's something far more personal. Today, Simon, I'd like to have a talk about what I think is a bit of a silent revolution, the rise in single-person households. And even if you don't think this specifically affects you currently, please stay with us because it will affect people you know, the people you work with, people in your family, and what it actually means for our housing markets and also for business, Simon.
Absolutely. The rise of singledom, the rise of single-person households, big trend. I'm always joking that it is particularly good news for people like toaster manufacturers, because if we don't all live in the same houses in groups of 3, 4, 5 people, but we all live in our own individual boxes, there are certain kind of items that anyone needs. This is one toaster per household. So the toaster industry, big toast, so to speak, they will have a great decade ahead with more Australians living alone.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way. Probably the same with microwaves and coffee machines now, because more Australians are living alone. And it's not just retirees or Gen Zs in tiny apartments, from newly single people at middle 50s to solo 29-year-olds navigating life on their own terms for the first time. This trend is actually shaping modern life, isn't it, Simon? It's actually also shaping the sort of housing markets that we need.
Exactly. So if we don't all live in big family units, which usually would, traditionally speaking, in Australia require a 3-bedroom brick veneer type product, you need a 1-bedroom apartment. And we are talking about apartments because there is very few 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, either 2-bedroom houses. But ultimately, this is an apartment product if I live alone for most of them.
Well, I got the information from this on work you and your demographics group have done based on ABS data and projections. And the longer I stared at it, the more I thought about how we live today and how we're going to live in the future. There's some interesting charts here, and I'll actually, because it was behind a paywall in Australian, we can't easily share it, but maybe we can talk through it.
Exactly. We have to use the power of our imagination here today.
Well, there is a couple of times when there is a peak in single-person households. I guess 29's the first one, and that's not surprising when people move out of home. But it's actually a bit later than in the past.
Exactly. That's because we delay a couple of major milestones in our lives. This is something like partnering up permanently or having the first child. So if you do those things later in life, then there is, well, who do you live with? Either you live in a shared house, fair enough. Many people do that, so they don't want to feel lonely. But many people, if they're alone, meaning unpartnered, they might as well want to live together. And then even if they are partnered up and they call this their temporary partner, their life stage partner or something like this, they want to have their own dwelling, their own place, so that they have the freedom to cut the relationship if need be. I have a reference back to 2 weeks ago when we discussed our divorce rates in Australia in another episode.
Yes. So, by the way, if you haven't listened to that, you're probably going to learn something about divorces in Australia that you wouldn't have imagined. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, once you've finished listening or watching Simon and me today, first of all, follow the podcast so you get this each week, but go back 2 weeks because you're going to understand one of the interesting trends that is shaping how and why people divorce. And it's probably not what you think. I won't say any more about that at this point, Simon.
And look at us with our cliffhangers. We're getting better and better.
Yes. So 29's one group, one age group where there was a jump in single households. And the next one was actually around 54 years of age. And later on 59, what happened there?
Well, this is when we start divorcing. This is when we actually start to then need another house, another dwelling, because if kids are involved, usually the kids stay with one partner moves out and needs another small dwelling. This is the cliche of the divorced dad living in this 1-bedroom bachelor pad as a 54-year-old nowadays. It was a bit younger back in the day, but now we are getting married later in life, so we're also getting divorced a bit later in life. That means the second wave of single households then occurs in the mid 50s.
And Simon, there's another group of single households, I guess those that we fully understood beforehand, and that's the older generation who unfortunately now live on their own because their life partners passed on.
Exactly. And what do? You don't immediately partner up in your 80s when your partner dies. You become a single household, and you tend to then now be a single household for longer because overall your life expectancy is longer than it was in the past. And so we have more older single person households. And looking into the future, we know that the baby boomers, the oldest baby boomer is only 79 years of age as of right now. So that means not all of their life partners have died just yet. This is just about to happen now. So we will see heaps of single baby boomer households in the next decade or two. And so we need dwellings for them. To be honest, most of them will stay in their dwelling. They will stay in their family home. So we don't need immediately new stock for them, but they live in these underutilized homes. And so we'll see if policy pressures increase on those single households to make sure that maybe we find a way to encourage them to downsize, which would allow the housing market as a whole to right size, to free up these bigger homes for families. That's policies that I would expect to be popular, since the Labour government will not reach their very popular or controversial housing target of 1.2 million homes that are being built in just 5 years. This is a number that they will not target, that they will not achieve. And so you must then think about other policy measures to right size the market.
Well, I guess that age group, that bracket 82 to 90, it also brings loneliness imposed by the loss of your life partner. And then in your 90s, if you're still alive, many people choose to live in assisted living. But interestingly, right there, those who are watching on the video, I'm pointing to my neighbour next door, and I won't say her name, lost her husband in the 80s. And interestingly, has partnered up with somebody who was an old school friend, similar age group. They knew each other socially. They kept in contact. And it's lovely to see this couple in their 80s very, very happy, restarting a new relationship and actually doing traveling around the world. So you're never too old.
Exactly. You never know what life brings, and we'll see more of these things, since essentially you are at 80 these days. You are much younger than you would have
Yes.
been at 80, 50 years ago.
Yeah, she's very fit and goes for a long walk every day. So that's interesting. So how do you think these trends are going to shape what we're needing to build? Because it's more expensive to build a 1-bedroom apartment or 2 than it is a 3 or a 4, because you've still got to have an entry hall and a kitchen and a bathroom and a laundry and a toilet. So it's not easy to build the right sort of accommodation. But I guess single people don't particularly want a 1-bedroom apartment either, do they? They're probably still looking for a media room or things like that.
I would say that if they have the choice, they would want a 2-bedroom product, particularly if you're older. Since we discussed that there are essentially different markets of 1-bedroom households, there are. If I'm single, maybe I would then want to, and I'm old. I mean, let's say my partner dies. I'm in my 70s, in my 80s. I might then say maybe I can't just stand being alone in a family home anymore. I want to move into a walkable neighborhood where other like-minded people are. It might be a retirement living facility. It might be just an apartment in a reasonably walkable or nice neighborhood. But then I'm not downsizing from my big family home to a studio if I can afford it. So I will probably then want 2 bedrooms. That'll be a comfortable 2-bedroom dwelling, because I have so many valuables attached to me that I'm not willing to sell. I potentially hope for my kids or grandkids to spend a night every now and then. So I need 2 bedrooms.
Do you think there's going to be more communal or shared living style options?
We are seeing them to start to take off, but these are, of course, an absolute nightmare to develop, a nightmare to manage. If you think about a stock standard cliche apartment where everybody lives in their own box, no shared spaces, the only shared spaces is where the mail gets collected, and maybe a car park with a couple of rubbish bins. That is easy to maintain. It doesn't take any kind of deliberate effort, to be honest, of the strata management. But if you have a shared communal space thing where you go, there is a booking system for the shared communal areas like a library or some sort of event center where the rooftop garden and drinks barbecue space needs to be cleaned. Just the amount of conflict that these kind of areas bring with them means that strata management needs to be very deliberate, smart, and switched on in those areas. Can be done. There's plenty of research that suggests it is very beneficial, that people like it, that it's good for your mental health. You might make friends or even decent relationship with your neighbors, but just the work,
I can
man.
imagine. Yes.
So I can see why people don't want to offer this product to the market, even if the demand is there, because it is harder to build, to get right from a design perspective, and then it has a higher maintenance cost than the alternative. And if I'm a lazy investor, I know what I'm choosing.
Now, these figures come from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the census. How do international students affect this market? Because I would assume a lot of those are single households.
They are single households. Almost all international students come here as singles, not partnered up. They're here to have how would I say, they're here to have a good time. They're here to just improve the academic credentials, but they also want a good time. And plenty of them occupy a very, very specific niche of the one-bedroom dwelling market, and that is the purpose-built student accommodation. So it is a property class in its own right that has absolutely no one other than international students living in it. They all aim for 10% of local students. They're lucky if they achieve that. On top of this are, of course, also international students that live in the free rental market, and they then either want a shared accommodation where you make friends with a couple of locals, where they show or other international students, so they would want a 3-bedroom dwelling maybe where they can share in, but some international students will just live in a 1-bedroom by themselves. So that market also exists. But overall, I think the narrative of international students disrupting the housing market is much exaggerated, because most of them are parked in this very specific niche of international purpose-built student accommodation. And the only way that they are really impacting the housing market is that the act of building their dwellings gobbles up a workforce that could be used to build other stock. And now they're building the purpose-built student accommodation stock. And that's their only real impact. Other than this, I'd say they're not that important as a
What about
group.
our migration policy then, Simon? Because we know that hundreds of thousands of people are coming from overseas. Are they usually family units or are they single people?
Mostly singles. There are, of course, family visas. So family visa is a particular visa class where people come, but it's a small cohort. Most of the migrants that come into Australia are 18 to 39 years of age. Half of them are international students, almost exclusively single. And then the skilled migrants that come here overwhelmingly come here as singles, maybe as couples. So they are ultimately, when they first come here, occupying small dwelling stock. And plenty of them would be just fine with a 1-bedroom stock, even though plenty internationals would want a more communal offering, because this is seen as a bit of an into Australian society. And that's something that I would highly advise any international new migrant. Doesn't matter where they are going, try to live with locals. If this is, if you are migrant
Cool.
in your early 20s or international student in your teens or whatever, try to live with locals. That's the easiest way to get integrated into the social fabric, which certainly was my main goal when I came here to Australia 18 years ago. That's what I had in mind.
So how does solo living affect loneliness? We've spoken before about an increase in loneliness in our society, Simon.
Well, I'd say that there are two ways. The first one is where it really doesn't matter. These are people that want to live alone. There is plenty of people who choose to live by themselves. They say, I don't want to be permanently partnered up and then share my dwelling with this partner and potentially kids afterwards. That's fine. So we don't worry about them. But there are plenty of people that essentially involuntarily alone. This is, of course, when your partner dies. You didn't hopefully choose for them to die. And then your mental health takes a kick in the guts. We know this. So this is where living alone is linked with poor mental health, which is why we would then, from a pure data perspective, advise those people. Maybe you can move into a more walkable neighborhood. Maybe there are different living arrangements for you where you don't feel this loneliness, where you have a bigger social network around you. There are, of course, young people who are single, who live by themselves, who would love a partner, but for whatever reason, they can't find a partner that matches their list of requirements. And then this is usually something where you go like, this is not really by choice, but it's also, that's okay. and I find my peace with this. But ultimately, and we know the mental health data that being married and living with your partner, that is good for your mental health.
Now, Simon, I know you do a lot of research, and this has come from an article from the demographics group. So when you see your clients and consult to them or do presentations, how do you help the clients who work with the demographics group?
Well, we always try to show them what their world looks like through our demographic data driven lens. And the self serving claim is that this then allows clients to better adjust their product offering, their marketing campaigns. It helps an awful lot with retention of staff and with understanding what actually attracts workers to your company. So we can do lots of work around this. And we always try to benchmark our data so that people understand their position in life in relation to other data much better. And once you know where you are on a map, it is much easier to navigate this map.
Well, at Metropole, we spend a lot of time looking at your research and demographics because we help our clients build, protect, and pass on their wealth safely and strategically. And in my mind, demographics is one of the major factors that are going to affect our property future as well. So if you'd like to us to help you, why not book a complimentary wealth discovery chat? And I'm going to leave a link to that in the show notes as well as to Simon's demographic group. Lastly then, Simon, what do these trends reveal about modern life? Are we becoming more individualistic? Are we just becoming more mobile, more flexible in how we define home? Because it seems that there are more younger singles, and many of them by choice.
Yes, it just shows that we just changed the way we live our lives. It became much less common to partner up and marry your teenage high school sweetheart. You partner up with probably your fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th romantic partner rather than your first. And therefore, you just have more opportunity to live single in a single household as a result. Of course, we also would traditionally have said something like work is more flexible. You can live wherever you want. Therefore, it is much more desirable to live in a rental accommodation, to move elsewhere, just to increase your labor mobility. That increases your likelihood to get a higher paying job. Unfortunately, these super high house prices actually saw this not to play out. And we see that people are actually reluctant to move. If you have a good rental deal in a one bedroom, two bedroom, doesn't matter. People tend to say something like, I'm not going from Adelaide to Sydney because dude, this is just very expensive. I got a good thing here. Maybe my job in Sydney would pay more money, but whatever, it's too hard. And so we limit labor mobility, which has negative flow on effects on national productivity and so forth. So that is something that is a bit of a drag on our economy. But ultimately, will this continue? Yeah, because we continue to marry later. Housing will continue to stay expensive. So I would say that that element isn't stopping. So we'll see more single person households at the lower end, definitely more single person households in absolute numbers on the older end because we now retire baby boomers and push baby boomers into old age. So they will increasingly become the big single person household cohort.
Well, Simon, as always, you've helped us see behind the numbers and you're talking about people, human story. And it turns out our homes are changing because we're changing. We're partnering later, as you say, separating more confidently, living longer. And increasingly, I guess we're living life on our own terms, and maybe that's good. So investors, planners, policymakers, anyone interested in where Australia is headed, the rise of the solar dweller is something you can't afford to ignore. And if you got some benefit from this and you don't currently subscribe to our show, please follow or subscribe depending upon what your app asks you to do. And do Simon and me a favour, the only favour we ask you, and that's to tell one person about the show. Just pass it on. Every show's got a app where a button where it allows you to pass it on, or just tell somebody about it. Simon, thanks again for helping us decode the data. Hey, that's a good name for a podcast. And look forward to catching up with you next week.
Fantastic. I'll see you next week.